What if I told you the Duchess of Sussex may never return to Hollywood again? Not because she doesn't want to, but because she's no longer welcome. Now pause. Let that settle in. Because somewhere between royal rebellion, million-dollar contracts, and perfectly curated Instagram-worthy soundbites, something cracked. Something imploded. And now, behind the shimmering curtains of fame and feminism, Meghan Markle, once the crown jewel of streaming's most lucrative royal gamble, has fled. Not to a safe house. Not to Canada. Not even back to Los Angeles. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. To Dubai? Let that sink in. No press conference. No sources close to the Duchess. No Archwell statement crafted in pastel fonts and flowery language. Just silence. Until the leaks began. Until someone inside Netflix opened their mouth. Until a producer whispered about a massive financial dispute. Until legal teams started pulling out archive contracts. And suddenly the phrase that had been floating through industry circles became a thunderclap. They want the money back. All of it. Every single dime. $120 million. Gone. And now, the streaming giant wants it returned. Let's rewind. Because this story isn't just about a deal gone wrong. It's about how a carefully manufactured dream turned into a digital nightmare. It's about how Meghan and Harry, once the most envied couple on earth, built a brand out of escape, only to find themselves imprisoned by the very deals they signed to escape with. It's about betrayal, broken promises, and a slow-motion collapse disguised as a content empire. In just 5 years, Meghan and Harry promised the world authentic storytelling, emotional truths, and a new kind of royal narrative. They gave us a docuseries, a tear-stained love story, a short-lived lifestyle brand, a sports show, a Mandela-inspired tribute, and a glossy polo docuseries no one watched. Each project came with press buzz, influencer hype, and dramatic trailers. But then, silence. Ratings drops. Internal drama. And then, just as quickly as she entered the streaming world, Meghan vanished. What really happened? What could possibly lead one of the most scrutinized women on the planet to flee to Dubai, alone, right as Netflix's legal teams prepared a refund demand that could bankrupt her brand? That's what we're about to unravel. Let's be clear, this isn't a surface-level tabloid spin. This is about what's happening behind the scenes. In boardrooms, in redline contracts, in the hushed phone calls between executives who once believed they had found the ultimate content unicorn in Meghan Markle. Instead, they got lawsuits, overpromises, and 5 underperforming projects with no real legacy. Let's take a moment to feel the emotional weight of that. Imagine being the face of feminist change, a symbol of modern royalty. A Hollywood actress turned duchess, turned global humanitarian icon. Now imagine waking up to headlines questioning whether you scammed the world's biggest streamer. Imagine your biggest backer demanding their $120 million back. Not because they're bitter, but because they believe you didn't deliver what you promised. How does a fairy tale unravel this fast? That's the real question. But there's more. Because Meghan's trip to Dubai wasn't just a retreat. It was, reportedly, a power move. A last-minute scramble to secure funding, protection, and possibly a new media home. Away from Netflix. Away from Hollywood. Away from the crumbling Archwell empire. And maybe, just maybe, away from Harry too. Yes, you heard that right. Multiple insiders have hinted that Meghan's sudden disappearance coincided with a sharp cooling in her relationship with Prince Harry, who remains entangled in a separate, quieter battle with Netflix over his own solo projects. Are we watching the end of the Sussex brand as we know it? Or is this just the beginning of a darker, messier chapter? You're going to want to hear everything. Because this story isn't just about Netflix and Meghan. It's about the rise and fall of modern branding, the fine line between authenticity and performance, and the corporate contracts that turn dreams into debt traps. Think about it. When Meghan and Harry signed their Netflix deal in 2020, the media world exploded. They were the couple who walked away from the crown, the rebels with receipts, the anti-royal royals. A brand so potent, so magnetic, so of the moment, that streaming giants saw dollar signs, Emmys, and audience loyalty in their eyes. But here's the contradiction no one wants to talk about. Meghan and Harry needed Netflix more than Netflix needed them. And when the fairy dust settled and the viewing numbers rolled in, it wasn't just the audience who asked. Is this it? It was Netflix. And they weren't happy with the answer. Let's be honest. The docuseries Harry and Meghan may have smashed early viewership records, but it didn't land the cultural punch they expected. Heart of Invictus felt more like a glorified PR project than a documentary. With Love, Meghan fizzled before it even saw the light of day. Live to Lead triggered a wave of backlash. Polo barely made a ripple. 5 projects. Hundreds of millions in budget. A global platform. But no lasting hit. And now? Now Meghan's in Dubai. No red carpet. No cameras. No Hollywood allies rushing to her defense. Just whispers of panic, breach of contract claims, and a team of lawyers who believe they're owed something. The Meghan Netflix honeymoon is over. And the messy divorce? It's just beginning. What happens when a duchess with a podcast, a cookbook, and a digital magazine empire fails to deliver the one thing she promised the world? Impact? What happens when your brand is built on reinvention and you run out of roles to play? We're going to unpack the Netflix deal, the projects that quietly flopped, the brewing legal war, and the shocking secrets behind Meghan's sudden escape to Dubai. We'll follow the money trail, decode the inner workings of Hollywood contracts, and ask, was this all doomed from the start? But more importantly, we'll examine what Meghan's future looks like now. Because if the doors to Hollywood are closing, where does that leave her? And does she even care anymore? The answers might surprise you. Because while the world was distracted by headlines about divorces and podcasts, Meghan was already 3 steps ahead, working on something bigger, stranger, and even more controversial, in a country that doesn't play by Hollywood's rules. This isn't just a royal scandal. It's a media implosion, a cultural reset, and a cautionary tale. So buckle up, because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What would you give to rewrite your legacy? For Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, the answer seemed simple: $120 million and total creative control. But what if the very deal designed to liberate them became the golden cage they couldn't escape? Let's rewind to the end of 2020. The world was still reeling from lockdowns. The royal family had been hit with unprecedented headlines following Harry and Meghan's explosive decision to step back from royal duties. And somewhere in the pristine boardrooms of Hollywood, a pitch was being finalized, one so bold, so historic, it would be whispered about in media circles for years to come. Netflix was betting big on a couple without a production background, without a studio team, without an Emmy to their name. And yet, Meghan and Harry had something more valuable: attention. Not just fame, not just relevance, but heat. The kind of heat you can't manufacture. The kind that surges every time a tabloid prints their names or a royal aide leaks a damning whisper to the British press. They were headline gold, and Netflix wanted in. But here's the twist no one saw coming. The Sussexes didn't walk into that negotiation room as desperate ex-royals. They walked in like brand architects, like strategists, like visionaries. At least, that's what they believed. The pitch was simple: a production company that would deliver powerful, purpose-driven content. Archwell Productions, a name born from spiritual self-reflection, wrapped in the language of activism, and rooted in their desire to be global storytellers. Not just content creators, cultural disruptors. So when Netflix signed the deal, reportedly worth over $100 million, possibly as high as $120 million with bonuses, it wasn't just a check. It was a declaration of war. War on the royal press machine. War on media narratives. War on silence. But here's where it gets complicated. Because while Meghan and Harry promised transformation, Netflix was expecting performance. Not just impact. Numbers. Subscribers. Global hours watched. Meme-worthy moments. Let's not forget, Netflix was bleeding cash. Disney Plus, HBO Max, and Amazon Prime were closing in. The company needed a win. And fast. So what did the Sussexes offer? A suite of ideas. A tell-all docuseries about their lives. A children's animated series inspired by empowering women. Documentaries on service, wellness, and leadership. And eventually, lifestyle content curated by Meghan herself. Sounds ambitious, right? Too ambitious. Because behind the closed doors of Archwell, the cracks were already showing. Staff turnover was high. Creative visions clashed. Meghan's desire for editorial perfection often clashed with production deadlines. And Harry? He seemed caught in the middle. oscillating between the desire to tell his truth and the paralyzing fear of public backlash. But Netflix wasn't interested in the drama behind the camera. They wanted deliverables. They wanted milestones. And fast. The first project to hit the ground running was Harry and Meghan, the much-hyped docuseries that would tell their story in their words. Netflix believed this would be their crown jewel, the royal version of The Last Dance. Intimate, emotional, viral, and in many ways, it was. The series dominated global headlines upon release. The visuals were cinematic. The production team included respected documentarians. The Sussexes were raw, vulnerable, and deeply curated. But there was a problem. Underneath the surface, something felt off. Have you ever watched something that's supposed to be explosive, but ends up feeling like a carefully rehearsed therapy session? That was Harry and Meghan. Sure, there were emotional moments. Harry speaking about the trauma of his mother's death. Meghan revealing suicidal ideation. A brutal behind-the-scenes glimpse at royal protocol. But audiences were divided. Supporters praised the couple's bravery. Critics accused them of self-indulgence and selective memory. And Netflix? They got the viewership numbers, but not the longevity. Within weeks, the cultural conversation moved on. The memes dried up, and a chilling question emerged in the entertainment industry. Did the Sussexes peak too soon? Let that question linger. Because even as the world digested their docuseries, Netflix executives were reviewing the production schedule for the next Archwell projects and growing nervous. Where was Meghan's children's series? Where was the docu-style lifestyle content she'd promised? Where were the follow-ups, the spin-offs, the extended universe? Suddenly, the $120 million deal wasn't looking like a long-term investment. It was beginning to feel like a short-term marketing stunt. And behind the scenes, Meghan was already shifting gears. Her focus turned toward a softer brand identity. Wellness, food, lifestyle. A far cry from the gritty social justice documentaries Netflix had envisioned. Insiders began whispering about creative tension. Meghan's perfectionism. Her insistence on high-end production value. Her discomfort with exposing too much. Netflix, reportedly, was stunned. This wasn't what they signed up for. They wanted content creators. They got image curators. The turning point came in late 2021, when internal Netflix memos reportedly flagged Archwell as at risk for underdelivery. That's right. Netflix's internal team was beginning to ask the unthinkable. What if the Sussexes didn't fulfill their side of the deal? What if this wasn't just a creative difference, but a full-scale misalignment? Meanwhile, Meghan's team was negotiating other partnerships. Spotify, Penguin Random House, and brand ambassadorships, all of which raised red flags inside Netflix's corporate walls. Was Archwell Productions being sidelined? Was Meghan using the Netflix platform as a launchpad, without any intention of building long-term content? These were the questions Netflix board members began asking. Quietly, cautiously, but persistently. And the timing couldn't have been worse. 2022 and 2023 saw massive layoffs at Netflix. Pressure on the platform to justify high-dollar deals mounted. Shareholders demanded answers. Suddenly, the Sussexes' charm wasn't enough. They had to deliver. And here's where the story takes a darker turn. According to one Hollywood agent who spoke on Background, Netflix's legal team began quietly reviewing the Archwell contract in early 2024, looking for clauses, looking for leverage, looking for a way out. Why? Because 5 years in, only a handful of projects had materialized. Most underperformed. Some were scrapped entirely. And yet, the money kept flowing. Advance payments, production budgets, retainers for development staff, all being tallied, all being reviewed. And as Meghan doubled down on personal ventures, an alleged new media brand, rumored speaking deals in the Middle East, whispers of luxury investments in Dubai, the question inside Netflix became increasingly urgent. Was she walking away? If so, what did that mean for their money? That's when discussions began, quietly at first, then with increasing intensity. Refund negotiations, performance clauses, litigation prep, and at the center of it all, silence from Archwell. Radio silence, emails unanswered, timelines missed, meetings postponed. Meghan, reportedly, was unreachable. And then, just weeks later, she was seen boarding a private jet, bound for Dubai. The location caught everyone off guard. Why Dubai? What was she doing there? And more importantly, what was she running from? Because as Netflix prepared to demand their $120 million back, Meghan Markle had already left the country, and no one at Netflix knew when or if she was coming back. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. How do you tell the world your story when the world already thinks they know it? For Meghan and Harry, the answer was Netflix's crown jewel, Harry and Meghan, a 6-part docuseries that promised the truth, the full story, and nothing less than a cultural reckoning. But instead of clarity, the series created chaos. Instead of unifying support, it split the world in two. Instead of healing the wounds of public scrutiny, it exposed even deeper scars, both inside the couple's private life and inside Netflix's glossy PR machine. From the very first trailer, it was clear that this was going to be unlike anything the platform had released before. Black and white photos of private moments, tearful confessionals, Meghan wiping away mascara in a hoodie, Harry walking behind his mother's coffin, his voice trembling as he said, "I didn't want history to repeat itself." The tone was serious, emotional, devastating. The message? They had suffered, and now they were ready to speak. But as the series dropped in December 2022, viewers quickly realized that what was being sold as unfiltered truth felt heavily edited. Let's break this down. Because while Netflix celebrated the early metrics, millions of global streams, top trending status, global media coverage, the real story was playing out backstage. The tension between perception and reality. What the public saw was a carefully curated narrative. Meghan and Harry, deeply in love, passionately devoted to service, and unfairly targeted by the British press. Emotional anecdotes, archival footage, a narrative of resilience. But what insiders saw was something else entirely. Multiple production sources have since hinted that Meghan clashed repeatedly with editors in post-production. She allegedly demanded reshoots, refused to include certain scenes, and pushed for more flattering cuts. This wasn't just about controlling the message. It was about controlling every frame. One source described it bluntly. She didn't want a documentary. She wanted a redemption arc. And that's where the trouble began. Because while Harry and Meghan was beautifully shot and meticulously assembled, viewers couldn't ignore the contradictions. They claimed they left the royal family for privacy. Yet here they were, broadcasting intimate texts, photos, and emotional breakdowns to the world. They criticized the tabloids for monetizing their story, while signing multi-million-dollar deals to do exactly the same. They insisted on being victims, while showcasing luxury mansions, designer wardrobes, and celebrity friends. The backlash was swift. British outlets mocked the docuseries as whining in high definition. American commentators called it tone-deaf. Social media exploded with memes ridiculing Meghan's sobbing sequences and Harry's vacant stares. And perhaps most damaging of all, former royal staffers and even anonymous Netflix crew members began leaking. One editor allegedly told a friend, "We couldn't even finish the final cut without another list of changes from Meghan. Nothing was ever raw enough, unless it made her look good." The emotional toll of the series was undeniable. There was the moment Meghan recalled feeling suicidal during her time in the UK. The quiet horror in Harry's voice as he recounted his father, then Prince Charles, refusing to take his calls. The ghost of Princess Diana, ever present in both narrative and tone. But even these raw confessions came with side glances. Viewers began asking, were we seeing the truth? Or just the most polished version of it? And Netflix executives began asking something else. Was this sustainable? Because while the series garnered huge viewership in the first 2 weeks, engagement dropped sharply after the final episodes aired. Discussion threads slowed. Memes stopped circulating. YouTube breakdowns plateaued. The Sussex story was beginning to feel repetitive. And in Hollywood, repetition kills buzz. But the damage wasn't just external. Inside Netflix, storm clouds were forming. One high-level executive allegedly complained, "They sold us a bombshell," and delivered a TED Talk. Others began to worry that the couple's reluctance to go deeper, especially on controversial royal topics, had neutered the entire project. Let's dig into that. Because one of the biggest criticisms of Harry and Meghan was what it didn't include. Where was the real dirt? Where were the alleged palace rifts? Where were the shocking truths promised in that dramatic trailer? What we got instead was a soft focus, wellness-oriented rebrand. Less documentary, more campaign video. And yet, here's the twist. Harry reportedly wanted to go further. Insiders suggest that during early edits, Harry was open to discussing more sensitive topics, like Prince William's alleged temper, King Charles's political entanglements, and even behind-the-scenes details of Queen Elizabeth's declining health. But Meghan? She shut it down. She feared looking petty, unrelatable, unpresidential. Yes, presidential. Multiple sources have since claimed Meghan saw Harry and Meghan as a stepping stone to a future in politics. In her mind, this wasn't just their story, it was her soft launch. A rebrand from Duchess to global diplomat. And Netflix? They played along. Until they didn't. Because by early 2023, internal memos began circulating. Ratings data showed a sharp drop-off in episode completion rates. Viewers tuned in out of curiosity and checked out of boredom. The Dream Project had become a statistical anomaly, viral on release, forgettable within weeks. And the consequences were immediate. Netflix cut marketing support for future Sussex projects. Internal meetings became tense. Timelines were tightened. Budgets trimmed. Meghan reportedly complained about a lack of support. Netflix producers countered with concerns about creative control. By spring, Archewell and Netflix were no longer speaking the same language. Meghan wanted elegance, subtlety, aspiration. Netflix wanted controversy, conflict, clicks. But while Meghan polished her brand, Netflix sharpened their knives. The $120 million investment was being questioned at the top, and the clock was ticking. To the outside world, it seemed like Harry and Meghan had achieved its goal, global attention. But inside Netflix, they saw the beginning of a disaster. Because as soon as the credits rolled on the final episode, Meghan disappeared from the set. She ghosted project meetings, refused new pitches, pushed back on deadlines for With Love, Meghan, delayed approval on Live to Lead. Netflix execs started to panic. They had a contract, but no content. And worse, a growing suspicion that they'd been used. The emotional climax of Harry and Meghan wasn't a tearful confession. It wasn't a call to arms. It was a silent retreat. Meghan, having delivered her version of the truth, stepped off the stage, leaving Netflix holding the bill. And that's when they started looking for a way out. Because while Harry and Meghan may have divided the world, it did something even more dangerous to Netflix. It divided the boardroom. Some believed the Sussexes still had value, if they could pivot, deliver something new, reinvent. Others believed the relationship was toxic, one-sided, financially irresponsible. And then came the final blow. A leaked internal document revealed that Netflix had only received partial outlines for upcoming Sussex projects. No scripts, no shooting schedules, no confirmed directors. Just vague concepts, vision boards, and silence. One executive put it simply. They overpromised, underdelivered, and then disappeared. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. What happens when the cameras turn away from the glitz and focus on the raw? That was the unspoken promise behind Heart of Invictus. The Netflix docuseries that stripped away palace intrigue and lifestyle branding and turned its lens towards something far more human. Wounded warriors, struggles, resilience, purpose. And, for the first time in their Netflix tenure, Meghan Markle was almost entirely absent. But was her silence a creative choice or a strategic retreat? Let's begin at the start of this chapter in Harry's post-royal narrative. Heart of Invictus was always Prince Harry's passion project. A deep dive into the Invictus Games, a global sports competition for wounded, injured, and sick servicemen and women, founded by Harry himself in 2014. This wasn't palace pageantry. This wasn't PR fluff. This was raw, visceral, and personal. Harry had poured his soul into these games. It was one of the few ventures he carried with him from his royal past into his independent future. And he believed, fiercely, that the world needed to see what these athletes were overcoming. Netflix agreed. In theory. But here's where the first cracks began to show. Because while Harry and Meghan was glamorous, polarizing, and headline-grabbing, Heart of Invictus wasn't. It was quiet, earnest, somber. And Meghan? Nowhere to be found. That absence wasn't just noticeable, it was deafening. Insiders say early versions of the series did include Meghan. Cutaways from home. Archival footage of the couple at past Invictus Games. But during post-production, something shifted. Meghan's appearances were reduced. Some scenes were reportedly scrapped entirely. Why? Some say she wanted to keep the focus on veterans. Others say it was a test, a calculated step back, to let Harry prove himself as a standalone brand. But if this was a test, the results were complicated. Because while Heart of Invictus received critical praise for its authenticity, it struggled to gain traction with viewers. Unlike the drama-fueled Harry and Meghan, this series didn't trend globally. It didn't spark TikTok debates. It didn't earn hashtags or viral think pieces. It was sincere, noble, and nearly invisible. Let's put it in perspective. Heart of Invictus dropped quietly in 2023 with minimal marketing. Just one official trailer. No red carpet. No high-profile interviews. No Meghan. For Netflix, accustomed to spectacle, this was alarming, especially given the budget. Reportedly, the series cost millions to produce. Multiple shoot locations, high-end editing, original music, and most of all, the Sussex name attached front and center. But here's the contradiction no one could ignore. Harry delivered exactly what he said he would, an honest portrayal of wounded veterans, their recovery journeys, and the community that sustains them. But Netflix didn't just buy honesty. They bought buzz, and buzz was nowhere to be found. You could feel the tension start to rise behind closed doors. Executives questioned why the Sussexes had chosen such a niche topic for their follow-up project. Marketing teams struggled to sell a story without controversy. PR reps reportedly begged Archewell for more behind-the-scenes access, more Meghan, more drama. They got none of it. One Netflix source put it bluntly. It was noble. It was powerful. It was a ratings black hole. And Harry? He seemed different. Gone was the breezy confidence of the docuseries. In interviews promoting Heart of Invictus, Harry appeared visibly tired, defensive, as if he were carrying the weight of unmet expectations. And maybe he was, because somewhere in this process, he realized something painful. Without Meghan, the media machine didn't care. The numbers didn't lie. Engagement on Netflix was modest at best. YouTube trailers received fewer views than expected. Global press coverage was shallow. And Archewell? Silent. That silence was louder than anything else. No extended press release. No podcast discussion. No social media celebration. Just a quiet pat on the back and a quick pivot to nothing. Meghan, at this point, was entirely off the radar. No joint interviews. No congratulatory tweets. No mentions in the final episodes. It was as if Heart of Invictus had been surgically removed from her brand. And perhaps that was intentional. Because Meghan had started working on something else, something stylized, curated, and very much her own. Something that, to Netflix's dismay, was nowhere near ready. With Love, Meghan delayed, Pearl, the animated series, canceled, and Live to Lead riddled with controversy. Heart of Invictus was supposed to be the filler hit. Instead, it highlighted everything Netflix feared. The Sussex brand was not bulletproof. In fact, it was fragile. Let's pause and ask something uncomfortable. Did Harry get used? Not by Netflix, but by the machine that surrounded him. Was Heart of Invictus greenlit not because of the story it told, but because it was the safest, cheapest way to keep Archewell's deal on life support? Because with Meghan retreating and Netflix questioning deliverables, Harry was the only Sussex still willing to get in front of a camera. And what did that get him? Polite applause, polished headlines, and the cold reality that sincerity doesn't sell nearly as well as scandal. Here's where the emotional spike hits. According to anonymous insiders, Harry returned from the final shoot in Germany visibly drained. Some say he confronted Archewell's staff about the lack of support. Others claim he called Meghan to ask why she hadn't even posted about the launch. Her response? Let's talk strategy when you're home. Strategy. Not celebration. Not pride. Not even gratitude. Just strategy. That word reportedly hung in the air like a ghost. Because while Harry had bared his soul and platformed his passion project, Meghan had moved on. Quietly. Deliberately. To Dubai. Not physically yet, but in mindset. Insiders now believe Meghan was already laying the groundwork for her overseas ventures at this time. Luxury partnerships, digital rebranding, private conversations with investors. And Netflix? They were growing increasingly impatient. By the time Heart of Invictus had wrapped its limited press cycle, murmurs of cancellation were circulating. Not just about future projects, but about the entire Archewell deal. One executive said, off the record, If this is the direction they're going in, we're out. We paid for royals, not docudramas no one watches. Another, more scathing, reportedly quipped, Harry's building community. Meghan's building a brand. Only one of those pays the bills. And perhaps that was the most cutting realization of all. Harry had fulfilled his end of the creative vision, produced, promoted, and presented an authentic documentary. And in return, he was left alone. By Netflix. By viewers. By Meghan. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What do you do when your brand outgrows your audience? Or worse, when the audience outgrows your brand? That was the unspoken crisis brewing beneath with Love, Meghan, a lifestyle show that never aired, never finished, and possibly never even truly existed. It was supposed to be Meghan Markle's soft pivot, her re-entry into media, a warm, polished, effortless escape from the firestorms of royal politics and Netflix drama. Gone were the headlines about tiaras and feuds. In their place, lavender, lemon cakes, scented candles, handwritten menus on artisanal parchment. But beneath that curated aesthetic, chaos reigned. Let's rewind to the origin. Shortly after Harry and Meghan premiered in Heart of Invictus Rap production, Meghan reportedly pitched a brand new concept to Netflix. One that was deeply personal to her, reflective of her values, and more accessible to global audiences. That concept? A lifestyle show inspired by her pre-royal blog The Tig. But this time, elevated with high-end production, celebrity guest chefs, and an aspirational tone that straddled Martha Stewart and Goop. Netflix, still clinging to the Sussex deal in hopes of recouping value, approved the proposal quickly. And for a while, things moved fast. Sets were scouted. A production company was quietly attached. Cameras rolled for early test shoots in Montecito and Santa Barbara. Meghan filmed recipe segments, garden interviews, and slow-living montages designed to humanize her to viewers who had grown fatigued by palace politics. But then nothing. No teaser. No trailer. No release date. Not even a single still frame released to the public. Why? Because according to multiple insiders, the project fell apart before it ever reached the oven. The contradictions were baked in from the start. Meghan pitched with Love, Meghan as authentic and intimate, but reportedly demanded full control over lighting, wardrobe, and post-production. She wanted it to feel spontaneous, but every scene was reportedly storyboarded like a Vogue cover shoot. She wanted warmth, but there were no jokes, no bloopers, no mess. One production assistant allegedly confided to a friend, "It was beautiful, but soulless, like filming a perfume commercial in a kitchen no one cooks in." And Netflix? They were alarmed, because this was supposed to be their pivot. A strategic move away from scandal and toward mass appeal. A Meghan who cooked, laughed, and spilled olive oil like the rest of us. What they got was another branded fortress. Sterile, scripted, stiff. Early internal test reels were shown to focus groups. The results were brutal. One participant described it as a Pinterest board without a pulse. Another said, "She's trying to be Oprah, but it comes off more like a home shopping host." And worst of all, viewers didn't trust it. There was an eerie sense of distance between Meghan and the content, as if she were performing a version of herself she hadn't inhabited in years. The cozy lifestyle influencer who used to blog about wine pairings was gone. In her place, a duchess trying to look like she was relaxed. Let's pause here and ask a key question. Why did this matter so much to Netflix? Because with Love, Meghan was their bet on longevity. The docuseries had generated buzz, but burned bridges. The Invictus project had earned respect, but not eyeballs. This show, this gentle, glossy, easily syndicated lifestyle series, was their path to keeping Meghan in the game without controversy. But it required something Meghan wasn't willing to give: vulnerability. Insiders say that during filming, producers begged her to include unscripted moments, to laugh when she flubbed a line, to show Harry and the kids organically, not as inserts. She refused. Every segment had to be pristine. And then came the moment that reportedly sealed the show's fate. A senior Netflix executive attended a private test screening at Archwell HQ. Meghan welcomed the guests, offered tea, and introduced the pilot episode. According to one attendee, the 30-minute pilot felt like a commercial for a woman who wants to be left alone. It was style without soul. Meghan reportedly smiled throughout the screening, asked for feedback, and received polite applause. Then the executive left and made a call to Netflix's CEO. One line stood out. She's not a lifestyle host. She's a brand ambassador who doesn't want the public anymore. And that realization changed everything. Because if Meghan was no longer interested in being public-facing, if she no longer wanted to participate in the content, what was Netflix paying for? They weren't investing in a brand anymore. They were subsidizing a retreat. In the weeks that followed, the With Love, Meghan team was slowly disbanded. Contracts were paused, shoots postponed, editors reassigned. Publicly, the show was delayed for creative revisions. Privately, it was buried. But Meghan wasn't done. While Netflix quietly shelved the series, she began courting new investors. Whispers of international partnerships surfaced. A rebranding effort was underway, one that didn't rely on American platforms or Western audiences. In fact, insiders say she was already in touch with production firms based in, yes, Dubai. But we'll get to that. Because before the jet left the tarmac, Meghan had one more project to push, and it would lead to one of the most controversial missteps of her post-royal career. A project that would ignite global backlash, trigger political consequences, and mark the first time Netflix regretted the entire Sussex deal publicly. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when you borrow someone else's legacy, and the world calls it theft? That was the chilling fallout of Live to Lead, the Netflix documentary series that was supposed to project purpose, but ended up provoking outrage. Inspired by the late Nelson Mandela and modeled as a tribute to leadership, courage, and global changemakers, Live to Lead had all the right intentions on paper. But behind the curtain, a media storm was brewing. One that would haunt Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's reputation with a fury neither of them seemed prepared for. This wasn't just a PR misstep. This was the moment the Sussexes crossed a line. Let's go back to where it began. Live to Lead was announced in December 2022 with a tone of solemn reverence. The timing was no accident. It came immediately on the heels of Harry and Meghan, as if designed to cleanse the palate. The docuseries would spotlight inspirational figures around the world. Leaders who had changed lives. Names like Greta Thunberg, Jacinda Ardern, Bryan Stevenson, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. A diverse, progressive lineup, presented as a global message of hope. And at the heart of the project, a connection to Nelson Mandela. The opening moments of the trailer feature a quote widely attributed to him. What counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived. It is what difference we have made to the lives of others. Harry's voice follows. This was inspired by Nelson Mandela. Meghan adds, we're bringing forward voices of people who make brave choices for the greater good. Sounds noble, right? It did, until the Mandela Foundation saw it. And the backlash was instant. Let's be clear, the Nelson Mandela Foundation had worked with a separate media group to develop the original Live to Lead content. It had nothing to do with Harry and Meghan until much later, when Netflix acquired rights and reportedly offered the Sussexes an opportunity to help present it. But here's where the contradiction exploded. Because despite not being involved in the original production, Harry and Meghan were heavily featured in the trailer. Their names were on the promotional posters. Their faces were splashed across marketing materials. And worst of all, viewers assumed they were the creators. They weren't. And that perception caused a firestorm. South African media erupted with criticism. Journalists accused the Sussexes of hijacking Mandela's legacy. Social commentators blasted them for a monetizing struggle. One newspaper even called the trailer an insult cloaked in activism. But it wasn't just cultural offense. It was personal. Nelson Mandela's own granddaughter, Ndalika Mandela, spoke out in a scathing public interview. Her words were direct, raw, and unflinching. I've made peace with people using my grandfather's name. But Harry and Meghan? They're using it to draw parallels between their own struggles and his sacrifice. That's offensive. Boom. The air left the room. Suddenly, the docuseries, meant to be their safe, noble follow-up to royal drama, became their most controversial yet. And Meghan? She went dark. No tweets. No statements. No interviews. It was damage control mode. Insiders revealed that her team was blindsided by the backlash. They believed they were honoring Mandela, not exploiting him. That the connection was made in good faith. But Netflix wasn't buying it. Because this wasn't just about perception. This was about a contract. According to sources close to the project, Netflix had expected Live to Lead to function as a prestige series, something to qualify for awards, boost public goodwill, and prove that the Sussexes could pivot to content beyond themselves. Instead, they got another scandal. And worse. Ratings were abysmal. Viewership on the platform plummeted after the first 2 episodes. Even progressive media outlets hesitated to promote the show, and YouTube clips featuring Harry and Meghan received disproportionate dislikes. The project had become radioactive. But here's the emotional twist. Sources say Harry was devastated. He had genuinely believed in the mission of Live to Lead. He saw himself as part of a global community of humanitarians. To him, this wasn't about optics. It was about legacy. But Meghan? She saw something else. Reports emerged of internal disagreements. Meghan allegedly pushed for a polished, minimal presence in the actual episodes. Just intros, not full narration. She was concerned that their involvement would overshadow the featured leaders. She was right, but not for the reason she expected. Their involvement didn't overshadow the leaders, it undermined them. It made the entire project feel self-serving. And Netflix was livid. Emails were exchanged. Legal teams were looped in. There was talk, serious talk, of modifying the terms of the Archwell contract. Why? Because the Sussexes were supposed to be content creators. But Live to Lead was produced by someone else. Netflix had simply looped them in to boost visibility. Instead, it brought shame. One Netflix exec reportedly said, "We brought them in to elevate the message." Instead, they turned it into a headline. By early 2023, Live to Lead was quietly buried. No awards buzz. No follow-up marketing. No second season. Just silence. And Meghan? Already planning her exit. Sources close to her began floating rumors of new ventures abroad. She was disillusioned with the Hollywood system, tired of the media's double standards, ready to build something on her own terms. That something wouldn't be built in America, wouldn't be built with Netflix, and wouldn't involve telling other people's stories. Because Meghan had a new story to tell, her own. But first, she had to tie up one last project. A sleek, shiny, glossy piece of content that would reveal everything the previous shows failed to achieve. It was called Polo, and it was about to become Netflix's most expensive disappointment yet. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Can a game played by royalty become entertainment for the masses? That was the question Netflix gambled on when it greenlit Polo, a lavish, high-gloss docuseries centered around Prince Harry's favorite sport. It was supposed to be sleek, sexy, and adrenaline-fueled. A break from the politics, the palace drama, the emotional trauma. This was Harry, unfiltered, thundering across sun-drenched fields on horseback. It was luxury. It was masculinity. It was prestige. It was also a disaster. Let's start with the basics. Polo isn't just a sport, it's a symbol. For centuries, it's been associated with wealth, status, and exclusivity. And for Prince Harry, it was personal. He's played since childhood. It was his escape from royal scrutiny. His one enduring passion that didn't revolve around titles or tabloids. So when Netflix, under pressure to extract content from their expensive Archwell deal, suggested Harry center a docuseries around Polo, the idea was met with cautious optimism. It would be sporty, visually striking, international. Harry would finally have a vehicle that wasn't built around pain or scandal. And Meghan? She was barely involved. In fact, this was the first major Archwell project where Meghan deliberately stepped back, offering no on-screen presence, no production notes, and, most tellingly, no post-release promotion. That decision would become prophetic. Because from the very start, Polo was cursed. First, there was the tone. Internally, producers couldn't agree on what the show was. Was it a sports documentary? A travelogue? A lifestyle series? Harry envisioned it as a tribute to the global polo community, a deep dive into the discipline, camaraderie, and charity efforts behind the scenes. Netflix wanted Drive to Survive on horses, and those two visions clashed violently. Filming began in Argentina, then shifted to California, with glossy drone shots of sun-drenched polo fields, slow-motion gallops, and cinematic sunset interviews. But the footage felt empty. One editor described it as pretty but pointless. Another said, "There's no story." It's just Harry in sunglasses talking about teamwork. Worse, focus groups found the sport confusing. You'd think global audiences would be intrigued by a game played by kings and billionaires. But viewers were baffled. The rules were unclear. The stakes felt low. The glamour was lost in translation. There was no underdog, no real antagonist, no hook. It wasn't a documentary. It was a vanity reel. And the reviews reflected that. When Polo quietly premiered on Netflix in early 2024, without fanfare, without a trailer, without even a press junket, it became clear something was off. Within 48 hours, it had fallen off the trending charts. Social media barely noticed. Critics shrugged. The New York Times called it a beautiful snooze. The Guardian dubbed it Harry's horseplay. Variety didn't even review it. And perhaps most tellingly, Meghan didn't post a single word. That silence sent shockwaves. Because up to this point, Meghan had at least gestured towards solidarity with Harry's solo projects. But this time, nothing. No Instagram quote. No stylized behind-the-scenes stills. No supportive mention in her newsletter. She was gone. Already looking east. Already courting new investors in Dubai. Already building something else. And Harry? Left to pick up the pieces. Insiders reported he was furious. Not with Meghan, but with Netflix. He felt the platform had set him up to fail. That they didn't understand the sport. That they marketed it poorly. That they cut the most meaningful parts in favor of glossy visuals. But Netflix had their own version. Executives said Harry refused to let producers add more conflict. He pushed back on edits. He resisted any mention of the royals, Meghan, or personal tension. He wanted Polo to be apolitical. They wanted it to be relevant. And relevance is something Polo never achieved. Now here's where the story turns dark. Because Polo wasn't just another underperforming docuseries. It was the last straw. According to leaked internal emails, Netflix executives convened a crisis meeting weeks after the series flopped. On the agenda, whether to terminate or renegotiate the Sussex deal. The metrics were brutal. 5 projects. 1 modest hit, Harry and Meghan. 2 PR disasters, Live to Lead and With Love, Meghan. 1 niche misfire, Heart of Invictus. And now a glossy dud, Polo. Millions spent. Minimal return. That's when the words no one wanted to hear were spoken. We want the money back. Suddenly, lawyers were involved. Netflix's legal team combed through the original contract, looking for performance clauses, breach triggers, refund language. And what they found would shake the Sussex Foundation to its core. Because buried deep in the contract was a provision Netflix had never before exercised. A clause that allowed partial reimbursement if content delivery and brand performance metrics fail to meet pre-agreed thresholds within a 5-year window. The 5-year window was closing in, and Netflix was ready to activate the clause. Word began to spread. Meghan, upon learning of the pending legal action, allegedly stopped taking calls from Netflix altogether. Her PR team went into lockdown. Archewell staff began quietly scrubbing mentions of the platform from their website. And then, just like that, Meghan vanished. Days later, paparazzi caught a grainy photo of her boarding a private jet in Los Angeles. Destination, Dubai. No press. No statement. No explanation. She was gone. And Harry? Alone again. Netflix's ultimatum had been issued. The Sussex brand was in freefall. The final project had flopped. And the $120 million deal once hailed as the future of content had become the most expensive miscalculation in streaming history. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What does failure look like when it's dressed in diamonds and press releases? For Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, it looked like a 5-year dream slowly collapsing under the weight of its own promises. Because by mid-2024, the question inside Netflix was no longer if the Archewell deal had failed, it was how badly. And more importantly, how much money could they recover before the curtain closed for good? Let's be very clear. The $120 million figure wasn't just a headline number thrown around by the tabloids. It was real, concrete, detailed across multiple tranches, initial development fees, milestone bonuses, staff costs, and promotional budgets. That figure included everything from documentary shoots and set rentals, to legal clearances and marketing campaigns, to Meghan's custom wardrobe expenses for filmed segments that never aired. Yes, you heard that right. Netflix footed the bill for entire productions that never saw the light of day. And now, they wanted it back. It started quietly. An internal audit. Standard procedure, triggered by a clause in the original Archwell-Netflix agreement that had been largely ignored since 2020. At the time, no one thought it would ever be enforced. After all, who would ever imagine the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, a global phenomenon, could underperform so catastrophically? But here we were. The audit reviewed 5 projects in total. Harry and Meghan, their initial blockbuster, delivered huge numbers on launch, but viewership cratered after week 3. The retention rate was below Netflix's expectations. Heart of Invictus, beautiful, emotional, and completely unmarketable. Audience engagement never broke through mainstream. Live to Lead, a branding disaster. Mandela family backlash. Confusion over creative ownership. Ratings in the basement. With Love, Meghan never finished. No episodes aired. No footage officially released. Yet hundreds of thousands had been spent on production design, test filming, and development. Polo glossy but hollow. Viewed internally as a vanity project, Netflix categorized the performance as negligible. The total combined return across these 5 projects? A fraction of what was projected, and the implications were damning. Because according to the contract, if Archwell failed to deliver a minimum number of viable, fully completed and aired projects within a 5-year window, Netflix could invoke a performance clawback clause. What did that mean? It meant Netflix had the right to demand repayment of certain amounts, especially funds categorized as advances or bonuses, if milestones weren't met. And Archwell had failed to hit every single milestone after year 2. The clause had never been tested before. Netflix had never used it against any high-profile partner. Until now. Let's pause here and really absorb the gravity of that. Imagine signing a deal worth 9 figures. Imagine thinking it would buy you freedom, creative control, and endless prestige. And then imagine realizing, years later, that the contract you signed may actually destroy everything you built. That's where Meghan found herself. Because while she was negotiating fragrance deals and boutique studio partnerships in Dubai, Netflix was preparing legal paperwork with a single chilling demand. Repay $120 million. Or face public litigation. Archwell's legal team went into panic mode. Internally, they insisted the performance clause was unenforceable. They claimed delays were due to creative differences, not negligence. They argued that Netflix had benefited from their image, their press presence, their global platform. But Netflix didn't blink. Their team countered with a brutal dossier, a 97-page file outlining everything Archwell had failed to deliver. Incomplete production timelines, undelivered pitch decks, abandoned scripts, canceled voiceover recordings. 3 separate occasions where Meghan refused to film scenes due to lighting and tone concerns. Worse, Netflix had begun compiling internal communications, emails, meeting summaries, budget sheets, that painted a picture of chronic indecision, image obsession, and executive-level dysfunction. One internal note from a Netflix producer read, "Every edit gets stalled. Every pitch gets rewritten. Every question becomes a crisis. We're building content around a ghost. That ghost? Meghan." But Harry wasn't spared either. A leaked Zoom transcript revealed Netflix executives venting in a private call. Harry wants authenticity. Meghan wants glamour. That contradiction is burning through our budget. And the most damning revelation of all, Netflix had paid out nearly $30 million in advance fees for Meghan's With Love, Meghan series, without receiving a single final cut. Legally, that opened the door, and Netflix was ready to walk through it. They issued their demand in writing. Full reimbursement of unrecovered costs related to canceled or underperforming projects, totaling approximately $120 million. Meghan's team? Floored. There were 3 options: negotiate, fight, or disappear. And Meghan, as always, chose the third. This was the moment she fled to Dubai. Not for a vacation, not for business, not for optics, but for distance. Distance from the U.S. media, from Archwell, from Hollywood, and most of all, from the legal nightmare waiting in California. Sources close to the situation say Meghan believed she could negotiate from abroad, using international legal protections and shifting jurisdiction to buy time. But Netflix wasn't interested in delay. They wanted a statement. They wanted an apology. They wanted their money. And Harry? He was caught in the middle, again. Reports surfaced of escalating tension inside the Sussex household. Harry, blindsided by the legal threat. Meghan, refusing to return. Advisors torn between preserving the Archwell brand or cutting their losses and walking away. One insider allegedly told a journalist, "This isn't just a refund. This is a reckoning." And Netflix wasn't backing down. In July 2024, they formally filed a notice of contract breach. Not a full lawsuit, but a signal. A shot across the bow. A message to the world that even royalty wasn't above accountability. Hollywood took notice. Within days, other studios distanced themselves. Brand partners quietly paused collaborations. Production houses withdrew tentative offers. The Sussex brand was radioactive. And here's where the emotion hits like a brick wall. This wasn't just the loss of a deal. It was the end of a myth. The myth that Meghan and Harry could escape the palace, tell their story, and rule the entertainment industry with truth and authenticity. Instead, they became a cautionary tale of ego, of overreach, of a dream too big to manage, and a team too fractured to sustain it. Netflix had made a $120 million mistake. But so had Meghan. She thought she could control the narrative. But she forgot one thing. Netflix owns the footage. Every outtake, every raw moment, every scrap of film that never made it to screen. And if Meghan tried to spin the story, Netflix could counter. With receipts, emails, clips, contracts, timelines. And suddenly, a quiet legal battle threatened to turn into something far worse. A public war. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. How do you tell the world your story when the world already thinks they know it? For Meghan and Harry, the answer was Netflix's crown jewel, Harry and Meghan, a 6-part docuseries that promised the truth, the full story, and nothing less than a cultural reckoning. But instead of clarity, the series created chaos. Instead of unifying support, it split the world in two. Instead of healing the wounds of public scrutiny, it exposed even deeper scars, both inside the couple's private life and inside Netflix's glossy PR machine. From the very first trailer, it was clear that this was going to be unlike anything the platform had released before. Black and white photos of private moments, tearful confessionals, Meghan wiping away mascara in a hoodie, Harry walking behind his mother's coffin, his voice trembling as he said, "I didn't want history to repeat itself." The tone was serious, emotional, devastating. The message? They had suffered, and now they were ready to speak. But as the series dropped in December 2022, viewers quickly realized that what was being sold as unfiltered truth felt heavily edited. Let's break this down. Because while Netflix celebrated the early metrics, millions of global streams, top trending status, global media coverage, the real story was playing out backstage. The tension between perception and reality. What the public saw was a carefully curated narrative. Meghan and Harry, deeply in love, passionately devoted to service, and unfairly targeted by the British press. Emotional anecdotes, archival footage, a narrative of resilience. But what insiders saw was something else entirely. Multiple production sources have since hinted that Meghan clashed repeatedly with editors in post-production. She allegedly demanded reshoots, refused to include certain scenes, and pushed for more flattering cuts. This wasn't just about controlling the message. It was about controlling every frame. One source described it bluntly. She didn't want a documentary. She wanted a redemption arc. And that's where the trouble began. Because while Harry and Meghan was beautifully shot and meticulously assembled, viewers couldn't ignore the contradictions. They claimed they left the royal family for privacy. Yet here they were, broadcasting intimate texts, photos, and emotional breakdowns to the world. They criticized the tabloids for monetizing their story, while signing multi-million-dollar deals to do exactly the same. They insisted on being victims, while showcasing luxury mansions, designer wardrobes, and celebrity friends. The backlash was swift. British outlets mocked the docuseries as whining in high definition. American commentators called it tone-deaf. Social media